Really Haunted Places does not support or endorse trespassing to visit haunted places. Before you decide to visit, please make sure to acquire the appropriate permits and/or permissions, and be respectful of properties that are privately owned.
Welcome back to our channel, Really Haunted Places. Today, we're taking you on a chilling journey through the top 7 haunted places in Galveston, Texas. So, grab your flashlights and let's get started. Our first stop is the haunted Mayfield Manor, a place that sends chills down the spine of even the bravest souls. This isn't just a haunted house, but a chilling reminder of the 1900 storm of Galveston. The ghosts that remain in the building are said to be victims of this devastating storm. The haunted house follows the story of Dr. Horace Mayfield, a scientist who experimented on the mentally ill at the turn of the 20th century. His life's work was lost after the hurricane, and he slowly lost his mind as his home was piled up with corpses. Legend has it that Dr. Mayfield was an up-and-coming physician at the turn of the 20th century, engaged in mental illness experiments on unknowing patients. When the devastating 1900 hurricane hit Galveston, Mayfield lost his parents and his fiancée, as well as all of his research. Dr. Mayfield was known for his excessive obsession with mental illness, particularly trauma's impact upon the body. He would often immerse his patients in creepy conditions before recording their reactions. His patients were unaware of his devilish deeds, and the investigations were non-consensual. The hurricane of 1900 ravaged his work, and with it, his sanity. The storm robbed Mayfield of more than his research, however. It massacred his fiancée and family. After the storm, Mayfield was tasked with supervising the makeshift morgue of the Mayfield Manor. He continued his wicked inquiries, using the bodies of the dead as his test subjects. Between unwitting or wind-wasted patients, Mayfield had more than enough to work with. Visitors allege that the Mayfield Manor is nevertheless haunted. Yet Joyce McLean, owner of the attraction, contends that it isn't. In one interview, McLean reported that Mayfield Manor occasionally has patrons come in who insist they have read stories and seen testimonials about the attraction and are certain the attraction is actually the original house from 1900, rebuilt inside the building. Yet McLean explains, obviously it is not, but try as we do to convince them, they are still certain our ghosts are real. So, is the haunted Mayfield Manor really haunted? Or is it just the chilling tales of Dr. Mayfield's experiments that make it seem so? You'll have to visit to find out. Next, we visit the Moody Mansion, one of the most famous haunted places in Galveston. This historic mansion is not just a symbol of Galveston's rich past, but also a house of many chilling tales. The Moody Mansion was built in 1895 for Narcissa Willis, a Galveston socialite who always wanted a sizable, stately home to impress her ever-growing social sphere. Narcissa's husband, Richard, was a prosperous cotton broker who could afford the mansion. However, Richard preferred to keep his assets liquid. Unfortunately, Richard died in 1892, and Narcissa funneled his fortune into the then Willis Mansion against her late husband's wishes. Narcissa commissioned the home within a year of his death. For this, Narcissa was estranged from her family. Her children never even visited the home. She thought that the extravagance of the estate would encourage her children to bury the hatchet. Avoided, abhorred, and alienated from her offspring, Narcissa remained in the Moody Mansion. Outside of the housekeeper, Narcissa was the estate's only occupant. While there have been no specific hauntings, guests have overheard disembodied voices alongside unidentified footsteps. Perhaps Narcissa still considers the Moody Mansion her own? The most common phenomenon appears within photographs. Pictures that are taken at the site often reveal unaccountable guests. These guests are blurred or otherwise indistinct, leading some to believe that they're apparitions. Spirit photography is particularly popular at the Moody Mansion. Visitors have even sworn to see faces appear in their pictures. Are these portraits of the paranormal or something else? In 1900, a hurricane swept through Galveston, nearly destroying the entire city. The Moody Mansion stood strong, but over 6,000 Texans died. Perhaps some of their spirits wandered to the Moody Mansion and never left. Haunted or not, the unearthly appearance of the property is peerlessly matched, foreboding and phantom-like. It's sure to spook the skeptic and superstitious alike. Plus, your camera may catch what the naked eye couldn't. The Bishop's Palace, also known as Gresham's Castle, is our next stop. This extravagant establishment is as eerie as it is exuberant, as mysterious as it is remarkable. It's a striking estate that's favored by locals and tourists alike. Oh, and both are quick to tell you that it's haunted. The Bishop's Palace was finished in 1893. It is one of the few original buildings on Galveston which survived the hurricane of 1900. According to the locals, the original owner Walter Gresham is highly protective of the property and still haunts the building. He is most often spotted during or just before freak weather events. The most infamous inhabitants of Bishop Palace are undoubtedly Walter and Josephine Gresham. Of course, their presence is no surprise. Walter and Josephine Gresham commissioned the estate, living within it with their 9 children until their deaths. The Gresham ghosts allegedly move about the mansion, attentive to the property's improvements and progressions. Keep your eyes peeled. Walter's known to pace the halls. He's particularly active during hurricanes, leading some to believe that his frequency is protective rather than pugnacious. Some even say that he's an anxious apparition, nervously fretting about. In 1900, a hurricane swept through Galveston, nearly destroying the entire city. The Bishop Palace withstood the storm, big enough that it even saved the lives of 200 people who ran to it for refuge. The Bishop's Palace was a beacon for safety in Galveston then, but today witnesses report inexplicable pushing, scratching, tripping, and punching from unseen or unidentified forces while they stand or pass by the front of the house. There are no reports of tragedies inside the home, but those who are sensitive to spirits say that Bishop's Palace is saturated in paranormal activity. Are these sinister specters? Or overprotective poltergeist? Broadway Cemetery, plotted between 1839 and 1939, is not just a resting place for the dead, but also a hotspot for ghost sightings. From dark tales of murder to tragic deaths, this cemetery has its fair share of ghost stories. The Broadway Cemetery District incorporates 7 distinct cemeteries. Don't be fooled by the surface, though. These urban burial grounds are 3 layers deep. Although there are an estimated 12,000 grave markers, there are 3 times the amount of bodies buried below. Among the inhabitants of the cemetery are Elise Romer Alberti, who newspapers called the Demented Mother, for murdering her 4 children, and Nicaragua Smith, the arsonist and Confederate soldier executed by firing squad. Smith was buried in an unmarked grave where he was formally put to death. Alberti? buried with the same children that she fatally poisoned. Smith and Alberti are just two haunted hosts of Galveston's necropolis. Before the Broadway Cemetery District, settlers would often bury their dead in sand dunes near the Gulf of Mexico. Yet the sand would shift or reshape, uncovering coffins and migrating markers. These burial markers were typically hand-carved or constructed from salvaged materials, making them unsustainable against Galveston's natural catastrophes. In 1900, a hurricane swept through Galveston, nearly destroying the entire city. The Broadway Cemetery stood strong, but over 6,000 Texans died. Perhaps some of their spirits wandered to the Broadway Cemetery and never left. Visitors report inexplicable pushing, scratching, tripping, and punching from unseen or unidentified forces while they stand or pass by the front of the cemetery. There are no reports of tragedies inside the cemetery, but those who are sensitive to spirits say that Broadway Cemetery is saturated in paranormal activity. The Galveston Railroad Museum is not just about trains. It's also known for its ghostly inhabitants. Visitors have reported seeing apparitions and hearing unexplained noises. The Galveston Railroad Museum was once the Santa Fe station. At its peak, over 40,000 people cut across the train depot, scrambling to gamble at speakeasies. Galveston immortalized these passengers through plaster models, decorating the space with life-size statuary. Even the sculptures are spooky. They're historically garbed and ghost-like. Yet the museum's most infamous inhabitants are unseen, passengers that never left their terminals, their spirits forever stranded at the station. William Watson is one such poltergeist. Decapitated by the railway train, travelers claim that he practices handstands on the cattle guards of the engines. Another inhabitant committed suicide off the 4th floor, where visitors sometimes spot her at the windowsill. Her legs dangle off the ledge, lax or limply hanging. Who are these railway apparitions? What binds them to the building? William Watson was a 32-year-old engineer from New York who had arrived at Galveston by steamship. Yet Watson's legend varies. Some say that he was a thrill-seeker who would regularly perform tricks by the train, entertaining travelers. Others say that Watson had been at the wrong place at the wrong time, his death an unanticipated accident. Those that buy into Watson's myth as a daredevil claim that he was practicing handstands on the train's cowcatcher. It was a reckless act that he had performed before, yet this time there was an unexpected ending. Watson slipped, sliding too quickly to scream for help. He was unable to save himself and was immediately decapitated. Spectators were shell-shocked, stopped still as Watson flailed against the train track. They discovered his head a quarter-mile from the site of the accident, still bound by his derby hat. It was September 1, 1900, just a few days before the Great Galveston Storm. His decapitated body was mangled beyond recognition. Employees of Galveston Railroad Museum blame Watson for strange, unidentified noises. They even allege that he misplaces objects. Hotel Galvez, also known as the Queen of the Gulf, is not just a luxury hotel, but also a place with a sinister past. The spirit of a woman who hanged herself after learning about her husband's death at sea is said to haunt the 5th floor. But there's more to this story than meets the eye. The Hotel Galvez was once referred to as the playground of the Southwest. This 226-room hotel conjures images of Galveston's Gilded Age, when Galveston was once the Vegas of the South, frequented by Frank Sinatra, Duke Ellington, and Dean Martin. The Hotel Galvez even operated as a temporary White House for Franklin D. Roosevelt. Despite its celebrity guest list, the Hotel Galvez is better known for its less temporary tenants. Guests who checked in, yet never checked out. One such guest was a young woman named Audra. Audra was a 25-year-old bride-to-be in the mid-1950s. Young, exuberant, optimistic. Audra's husband was a mariner who often sailed in and out of the port of Galveston, leaving Audra occasionally alone. During his offshore excursions, Audra would rent room 501 at the Hotel Galvez. Room 501 was in particular proximity to the elevator, which Audra would use to access the ladder. Audra would climb this precarious ladder to the red-tiled rooftop, where she would await the ship of her fiancé. Wakeful, watchful, wild with love, Audra sat inside the hotel's rooftop turret, impatient and persistent. After a catastrophic storm, Audra was informed that her fiancé's ship had capsized, that all hands were lost. Inconsolable and overcome with despair, Audra hung herself in the west turret of the hotel. If that's not tragic enough, her groom arrived at Galveston a few days later. He had survived the collapse, eager to re-encounter his bride. Audra, of course, had been recently interred. Visitors to the Hotel Galvez claim that Audra frequents the 5th floor, though her most popular place of residence remains her matrimonial room. Some claim to feel the sudden chill of her specter, while others hear the inexplicable slamming of doors. Televisions turn off and on without explanation, lights, too, flicker back and forth. Our final stop is the Seawall Walmart. This place is not just a popular spot for shopping, but it's also known for its ghostly inhabitants. The Seawall Walmart sits on the site of a former orphanage. The hurricane of 1900 destroyed the orphanage and killed 98 children and 10 nuns. Today, it's said that the spirits of these orphans still roam the store. In the 1920s, the area was occupied by St. Mary's Orphanage. Almost all of its residents, 10 nuns and at least 90 children, perished during the fearsome hurricane that came ashore on September 8, 1900. The nuns used clothesline to tie the children and themselves together. The only survivors were 3 boys who had wrangled loose and climbed a tree. Today, employees of the Seawall Walmart say that the ghosts of the orphans play with toys in the stores. They have reported hearing the sounds of children crying, laughing, and even a young girl calling out for her mother. Cash registers going haywire, electronic doors opening and closing on their own, and items out of place both in the store offices and on the shelves are some of the eerie activities reported by the employees. And there you have it, the top 7 haunted places in Galveston, Texas. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling content from really haunted places. Until next time, keep exploring and stay spooky.